Hi guys, it's Jo here from Time for Tea Designs with another video tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be making this springtime card using our butterfly stamp set and some of the other items from our new release. So first of all, I just wanted to check my layout, and I'm using this A5 size piece of super smooth cardstock that is from the Time for Tea Design shop. And I'm just taking that Hooray sentiment, which is a large sentiment from the new release, and placing that onto my card with the stamp that I'm going to use, just so that I can see whereabouts I'm going to position those elements on my card front. I'm going to trim this down a little bit eventually, but it will fill the majority of my card base. I've lined up my stencil so that the bottom part, which has the grass element, is whereabouts my girl image is going to stand. And I'm using some Twisted Citron Distress ink and some of the crushed olive, I think that is, Distress Oxide ink, just to create my grassy border along the bottom of my card base. Moving my stencil along and lining that up so that we get a nice seamless blend across the bottom. Again, using some of the Twisted Citron first, and then around the top using that darker green Distress Oxide ink. So I've now, once I've cleaned off the bottom of that stencil, I'm using the top portion of the stencil, which has our cloud elements on it. So this stencil, the Sunny Side Up Again stencil, is really, really versatile. You have that sun ray in the middle, and then you have your grass and your clouds, all part of the one stencil. So you're getting three stencils in one effectively. And I'm just using some of my milled lavender Distress Oxide ink to create this nice purpley background. So I wanted to use something a little bit different to just the traditional blue, and create something that was really pretty and a bit of a dusky springtime sky. And I'm just flipping my stencil over so that I'm getting a different direction of those clouds. So just moving it around and then lining it up so that those fluffy clouds are all across the background. So just adding the last little bits there, and then around the areas that are quite white, I'm just going back over with some of that distress ink just to make those less stark and add a little bit of colour to them. So I love how those fluffy clouds have turned out. They look really, really effective. So now we can just add a little bit of extra texture. So I'm just using my little spray bottle of water to add some water droplets, some really fine ones, to the background there, and then just blotting that with my tissue. It's a little bit hard to see on screen, but there is just those little dots you can see there that's created that extra little bit of texture. And then for some additional texture, I thought it would be a really nice idea to add some little splatters of white. So I'm taking some of my white acrylic paint and just flicking that off the side of my palette after I've added a little bit of water to it. So if it's not flicking, then just add a little bit more water that down a little bit, and then splatter that all over your background. So while my background is drying, I'm going to stamp my images. So I've taken my little girl image from the butterfly stamp set, some of those butterflies, and then there are a couple of toadstools as well that we'll add to our background. Using my Stamp Perfect platform, which is new in stock. It's a really handy size. I love this tool, and this does just mean that you can get a perfect stamped image every time. If it's not quite clear, like I felt my little girl image needed a second stamp, you can be sure that you're going to get that positioned in exactly the right place, and then you're going to get a really nice crisp image. I stamped my images onto some super smooth cardstock, and you can see that I have used this to stamp images before, but I don't like to waste any of my cardstock. So I've just trimmed that down and used the spare piece here to stamp my images. And I'm colouring these in now with my Copic markers, and starting with the flesh tones to create my little girl. And I'm going to colour her in the same sort of skin tone and hair tone as my mum, as in my head I had this design as a nice Mother's Day card. So in the UK, Mother's Day is coming up this weekend. We may not all get to see our mums this weekend because of the coronavirus at the moment, but it's still nice to let relatives know that we're thinking of them, and a card is a really lovely way of reaching out to people to say hello and let them know that we love them. So this card, like I say, is going to be for my mum, and my mum has blonde hair. So I'm colouring her hair in shades of yellow. So I'm starting with the YR20. I'm building up my shadow just by flicking small flicking strokes just underneath the head, and at the tip of the hair, and then underneath her hat. And just going from lightest to darkest, and then going back over those darker colours with my mid-tone, and then blending them through the middle with the lightest. You've seen me do this before if you've watched previous videos. I do prefer to start with my lightest shade and build up, because I feel it's much easier to add colour than to take it away. So some of my darkest colour, the Y28 there, is just adding some deeper shadow, but I did want to keep the majority of the hair looking blonde, and a natural blonde rather than a golden blonde. So now I'm using my background just to help me decide what colours that we were going to use for the rest of the card. And as a group, because this was recorded during our Facebook Live, we decided that we would use some of the BG colour group, so kind of the minty green colours, and these are some of my favourites. So I'm using tones of BG11, BG13 and BG34 to build up the colour on her dress, on her hat and on her shoes. I'm going to keep my colour scheme quite simple, so I'm only going to select 3 colours that I'm going to use throughout my images, just so that it brings them all together and we don't have too busy a background, as we've already got a colourful scene going on behind us. So I want to make sure that all those colours tie together. So again, the same theory as before, starting with a layer of my lightest colour and then applying those shadows with my mid-tone and then darker tones, and creating a little bit of illusion of some folds in her skirt by adding those little flicks at the bottom in almost a triangle shape, pointing up towards her waistline. So for my butterflies, I'm using the same combination of the 3 colours that I've chosen. So I've chosen a purple and I've chosen a peachy colour. I do like this trio of colours together. I think it works really well. But I made the mistake of colouring the centre of my my butterfly in that minty green, and I think he just looked a bit too much like an alien, and I really didn't like him. But I pressed on, went on to my next butterfly, and I kept him quite simple, or her quite simple, and left those wings quite white because I did feel that I might add some glitter towards the end. And in the end, I decided it is just cardstock. I can just stamp it again. So I re-stamped my butterfly and decided to colour him a little bit differently this time. So I've gone with the purple around the edges of the wings and for the heart, and then just used some of that peachy tone around the body and on the wings. So, and I've blended that out with my blender brush, and then use that same peachy tone for my toadstools, as that, although traditionally toadstools would be red, that wouldn't go with our colour scheme today. So I've kept those a lot in line with our colour scheme, and I think it still works really, really well. So now I'm happy with the images that I've coloured. I'm going to use the coordinating dies to cut each of these out. And I do love this bit when you pop those images out and they've got a really clean, crisp white border around each of those images. I'm just being extra careful with my washi tape so that I don't tear my cardstock. But you can see there just how lovely they look once they've been die cut. So I've got all of my images together. So now we can start working on our background. And again, I'm just using my images here to help me work out my placement for my sentiment. So I'm just going to grab my sentiment now and just pop that in place with the little girl. And what we're going to do today, we're going to make a shaker card using this sentiment as our opening for our shaker elements. So now I'm happy with that positioning. I've die cut that out of our background, and again, just being very, very careful about how I remove my washi tape. And you can see there that with all of those die cut letters, that just carries on that lovely background. And another idea would be just to layer those up with some other pieces of cardstock and just keep them as almost a shadow across your background. But I was determined we were going to make a shaker card today. So because this is going to be slightly bigger than I would normally make, I don't have a card base pre-prepared, but I do have some of this lovely moon mist cardstock that we have in the shop. And it's an A4 piece of cardstock. I've just used my scoreboard to score that in half so that we'll have an A5 size card. My background is also A5, and I want to see some of that grey behind my background there. So I'm just going to shave this down ever so slightly across all the sides. My little trimmer wasn't quite big enough to do the length, so I've had to pull out the bigger tool here to use, and just to take off those little edges there. And now you can see around the back, around the background there, we have some of that grey peeping through, and it looks really effective. Just frames our background really nicely. So I'm using the negative now to help me position my my letters, because I want them to be in the background of my shaker card so that you still get that continuous view of those pretty clouds. So just using some liquid glue and slotting those into each of those openings, so that when I remove my my background panel, they will still be in place and they will all be perfectly lined up with my panel once we've got those shaker elements in place. So the next step is to add some acetate, and I did just have a little scrap piece of acetate in my stash that fit perfectly over the back of my sentiment. So I'm going to use some liquid glue. I'm just going to pop that over the back of my sentiment strip there. Make sure that's nicely adhered in place, and then we will need to apply some tape. Now, normally what I would do when I'm creating a shaker card is that I would add my tape to my card base and then the panel would go on top. However, if I'm just to do that this time around, then I wouldn't be able to see where I was lining up my words. So I'm actually doing it back to front in a way. So this is, my tape is going straight onto my base panel rather than on my background. And I'm making sure that my tape is fully wrapped around that sentiment, because I don't want my sequins to fall to the bottom of my card. I want them to be trapped in that area where my sentiment strip is. And I'm going to apply 2 layers of tape so that my sequins have got plenty of space to move around and shake about, and they're not trapped behind that acetate because it's not the tape wasn't thick enough. So now I've got a good layer of my tape onto my background, and I'm just lining up my panel over the top just to see that that does marry up really well with those letters. And now I'm just figuring out where I'm going to place my sentiment. Before I stick the panel down and I put my sequins in place, I want to stamp a sentiment underneath my larger sentiment that I've die cut, and I've selected the sentiment "Enjoy Your Day," which is from the new Hip Hop Hooray stamp set with our little bunny rabbits that was released last month. So I'm using my stamping platform again to help me line this up, and I'm using some Versamark ink to add that sentiment. I did feel like it might not have been as straight as I wanted, but hey ho, it's handmade, and I still think it looks really great. I think I don't think people would really notice. So before I add my sequins, I am just using a brush to pick up some dust from my anti-static bag. My anti-static bag I keep just in a little polythene bag, and it does collect some of that dust, and that really helps me line the inside of my tape so that it's not as sticky, and my sequins are less likely to stick to the inside of my shaker element once it's created. So I had a few sequins, and as luck would have it, they did all match my colour scheme, and that wasn't pre-planned at all. But thankfully, I've got quite a few sequins in different colours in my stash, so I was able to find some that worked really well with my colour scheme. So I've added my background over the top now, trapped all those sequins in place. There's a little bit of my foam tape poking out of the side that I've just pushed in there with my poker tool, and that seems to have done the trick. And you can see there that the sequins are all moving about freely, and you can still make out the hooray sentiment in the background, which works really well. So now to add my little girl, I've just used some liquid glue to add her to the side of my hooray sentiment. And again, I'm using liquid glue for my butterflies because there's already a lot of dimension in this card. I don't think it needed any extra with these images. Now, you will have noticed that in that bottom corner, there was a little black smudge from when I did my sentiment. I don't know whether it came from my thumb or where it came from, but really handy to have a little element like that toadstool, which covers it up perfectly. I've added some finishing touches with my Jelly Roll pen just to add a few bits of highlights, but I also felt that there was just lacking a little bit of extra decoration. So I did have some flowers that I'd coloured and cut out previously from a previous project that was left over. So I've added those to my toadstools, and I think that does just add a little bit of better balance to each of those areas. And then finally, for the extra finishing touches, I've added some stickles to the wings of my butterflies, and I'm using some Nouveau crystal drops just to add a few little droplets in the sky, almost like my butterfly trails, but just for an extra little bit of decoration. And that's our card complete. And to make sure that those drops stay as domes, I have just given that a good tap onto my work surface, and that will mean that they all just lie a little bit flatter and don't form into peaks. And our shaker card is moving around nicely and is complete. I really do hope that you enjoyed the video today. It's been a lot of fun to make. If you did like it, then please do like and subscribe to our channel. There will be more videos coming up in the future, so do look out for those. And obviously we will be back again for our usual Thursday night Facebook Live over on our Facebook page. So do join us for that every Thursday night at 8 o'clock. Thanks again for watching, guys. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye now.